JFK spoke at Amherst about 3 weeks before he was assassinated. And he gave a talk in honor of Robert Frost, with whom he had a special relationship. And Amherst was doing the groundbreaking for Frost Library, Frost having taught here. And Kennedy came in honor of Frost and Amherst. And at the time, he said there were 3 things about Amherst that he honored. The first, and this is 54 years ago, the fact that Amherst had, in his words, provided funding for needy students of talent, providing opportunity for students regardless of means, that Amherst was a champion of the liberal arts, which he believed was essential to a thriving democracy, and that Amherst also had what he called many servants of the king, other than the original one, and that these people, these graduates of Amherst who were committed to serving a larger national purpose, were people that he hoped the current students then, 54 years ago, would emulate. That is, that all students who had the privilege of an Amherst education would also see that they then have a responsibility to serve a larger purpose. But the speech really focused on the arts and the importance of poetry and artists to democracy. And any of you who've attended events at the Kennedy Center in Washington will see quotes from that speech engraved into the marble outside and indoors at the Kennedy Center. It was one of few presidential speeches focused on the importance of the arts, and it's been cited many, many times without many people knowing that it's a speech he gave here 3 weeks before he died. I'll read you just one passage from the speech that's often quoted and was quoted last week. Kennedy says, "When power leads man towards arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the areas of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of his experience, of his existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses, for art establishes the basic human truth, which must serve as the touchstone of our judgment." Art establishes the basic human truth, which must serve as the touchstone of our judgment. A good time to think about truth as the touchstone of judgment and art as the source of truth. We scheduled panels of students, alumni, faculty to talk about Kennedy's speech at Amherst. And we also had the good fortune of having Congressman Joe Kennedy III speak at the end of the day, in the spot where his great-uncle, JFK, had spoken 54 years ago. The event was spectacular and quintessentially Amherst, primarily, I would say, because of our students. The 3 students who gave presentations gave absolutely gorgeous accounts of how they read Kennedy's speech on the arts. The speeches were analytically fabulous. They showed the students' independence of mind. They showed how well they write and how beautifully they express themselves. They also showed something that many parents write to me about when you write, about the things that you feel Amherst has done for your children. And that is, they showed remarkable confidence. And that confidence is a big part of what we want them to acquire at Amherst, whether they had it coming in or not. And the intellectual confidence of these students was remarkable and really palpable. And they were joined by alumni from the class of '64 who had been here when Kennedy spoke and who talked about their experience of having the president here and their memories of the speech itself. And then 3 faculty members spoke about the speech and really transported me and many others in their approach to it and their own poetic voices. It was an extraordinary day. but it seemed very Amherst to me. First of all, the intellectual quality. Secondly, the intergenerational community that it formed. Alumni, current students, community members, local and state elected officials, Congressman Kennedy. It was a quite beautiful event. I'm really glad and feel fortunate that I got to experience it. It also showed what colleges and universities contribute to a thriving democracy insofar as they constitute intergenerational communities, the sources of which in the country seem at times to be diminishing. The following Tuesday, this past Tuesday, we gathered in Frost Library to celebrate Richard Wilbur, one of the country's great poets who died a few weeks ago. He is an Amherst alum, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, National Book Award winner, one of America's great poets. And he also taught at Amherst. And that too seemed quintessentially Amherst. It was a packed room of people who wished to remember and honor Richard Wilbur and poetry. And what did we do together? We read his poems to one another. And some of the readers were members of the English department faculty or recent graduates of the English department. And their readings were gorgeous. The poetry is already beautiful, but their readings were extraordinary. But it was a very simple event. It had a kind of quiet, partly because of Wilbur's own focus on the beauty of the everyday. I can just recite one line and I won't go further. Love calls us to the things of this world, first line of one of his most famous poems. And the love that constitutes a community of the sort that Amherst can be at its best calls us to the things of the world and allows us to appreciate them. These two events occurring in 1 week struck me as a good reason to be at Amherst. And they made me aware of how fortunate I feel to have chosen to come here, and in my 7th year, to feel that I'm part of a community of students and faculty and staff who are as talented as the people in this community are, but also who are as decent, who can rise to a high level of excitement when unveiling a mascot, can be silly and fun when the stakes are low, as they should be at times, and who can also be capable of the sort of quiet and solace that the Richard Wilbur event offered us all on Tuesday. The mascot unveiling was another wonderful event of the past few weeks because it had a quality of silliness and fun, and our students need that. Amherst is a very serious place, and the intensive interaction of faculty with students and students with faculty and with one another is what makes the place great, on the one hand. But I have believed since I came here, and I still believe, we need to have low-stakes, community-wide fun experiences, of which we're developing more, creating more and more. Maybe there can never be too many, as long as they don't detract Professor Sarrett from studying. But Professor Sarrett is the source of silliness, just so you know, as are many other professors when they let loose, so no problem. Now, I'm talking about events and experiences that I'm, oh, it's so glad it's not my phone. It could have been. I'm talking about aspects of Amherst that are continuous, that are a preservation of what has always made Amherst great. But as some of you probably know or might be wondering, we're also making changes or adapting at Amherst in ways that will help our students meet the needs of this time and their future. And I'll just name a few of the ways in which Amherst is changing as we try to preserve what has made us great. We are well known for the humanities and the humanistic social sciences, and we want to preserve our reputation for it. While enrollments in the humanities at many institutions, the greatest institutions, have gone down precipitously, they have remained steady at Amherst. I think that's a testament to the offerings here and the quality of the faculty, but also to the reputation of the college. But at the same time, to keep pace, Amherst has to be great in the sciences, in the STEM fields generally. The fastest growing majors at Amherst are neuroscience, computer science, and math and statistics. And we need, in the upcoming campaign that we'll launch in the spring, to add faculty in the STEM fields in order to ensure that students have the student-faculty ratio across all disciplines that Amherst promises and that's required for the kind of education we want to offer. In the meantime, many of you will have seen the building that's going up on the eastern part of the campus. It's massive. You're nodding. It's going to be beautiful, and it preserves the view of the hills from the upper campus. That science building is going to set Amherst apart because, unfortunately, in fact, few liberal arts colleges will be able to afford the kind of interdisciplinary, cutting-edge science facility that is going up on our campus right now. We won't be the only ones, but we will be among the few who have facilities of this sort. It will help us attract great scientists and teachers of science. It will help those faculty with undergraduate students do great and contemporary scientific research. It will promote interdisciplinarity, and it will all occur as science education should in the liberal arts. That is, education of students in the sciences, in math, who also are trained in other disciplines to think not only about scientific and technological progress on their terms, but to ask themselves the ethical, social, and human questions about the uses to which science and technology are put. That, in my view, is the value of an education in the liberal arts and the value of studying science in the context of interdisciplinary work. The other significant change at Amherst, of which we're really proud, is the development, it's still in development, of the Loeb Center for Career Exploration and Reflection, which replaces or transforms what was just a traditional career center of the sort you'd have found at many colleges, where seniors go when they realize they need a resume and an opportunity to interview for jobs. This new center, with a very strong staff of people from different sectors of the economy, is there for students from the moment they arrive. And you may wish to encourage the students who are your children to take advantage of it. We're working hard to make sure that we make contact with students from the time they arrive. They are working hard there to create opportunities for students and link them to internships, to opportunities to do research with faculty here or at other institutions, to travel in combination with faculty and classes, and do a range of other things that constitute more active forms of learning and more group and project-based learning, which, as we know from research and experience, is the way people learn best often. And this center will also, and is already, sending students of all class years out to meet our alumni in different job sectors, to visit their places of work in groups of up to 20, to try and get a sense of what it would be like to work in finance or in education or in the not-for-profit sector, in the government, which Kennedy pleaded with students 54 years ago to enter, and we should be doing so now too. And they get a sense, and some of them early on make a decision that what they thought they might have been interested in is actually not their passion at all. So these experiences and internships are as valuable for learning what you're not going to do as they are for getting an opportunity to do something. These are some of the things that we're doing in order to adapt to the world that our students live in or will live in when they leave. And finally, what's obvious on our campus, beautifully obvious on our campus, is the opportunity that Amherst continues to offer, for which Kennedy complimented Amherst 54 years ago, despite the fact that Amherst was not nearly as socioeconomically or demographically diverse in other ways as it is today. And preparing graduates for the world that they're going to enter now means allowing them to live in a world here where part of what they learn is how to build bridges to people who are unlike them, which is actually everyone, since every individual is different from every other. But people who come from backgrounds, cultures, countries, religions, political perspectives that are quite different from what they've grown up with, and with whom they build friendships of the more private sort, the more intimate sort, but with whom they can also build what I like to call friendship of the sort that is a civic necessity. And that form of friendship as a civic necessity is something that our students have an opportunity to learn here in ways that at most institutions students don't. I hope that all your students, all the students who are your children, are finding ways to take advantage of the diversity of our student body, the various and many forms of that diversity, because it's a gift. And our graduates will be a gift to this democracy and to the world if they build the skills required of intimate friendships, but also the friendships that make for civic good. That's what I have for you this morning, and I'm happy to try to answer any question. If the question is too hard, I will turn to Aditi or one of my colleagues to my left, your right, and we'll do our best. We'd love to hear from you, so thank you very much for listening. Yes.
In response to one of your last comments, I think that thank you. I think that the goal of trying to build relationships that build civic responsibility and foster, an accepting society are very laudable and one of the unique aspects of Amherst. What is the university doing to try to help foster that? I know that there have been some events on campus that have been somewhat contentious, and I think that it would be nice to know what the university is trying to do to build cohesiveness.
Yeah, good question. Well, yes, building cohesiveness is a slightly different thing, but we can come back to that. Actually, because this is Amherst, and I actually would love for you all to hear from the Dean of the Faculty on this, because she has been extraordinarily inventive and in providing faculty with incentives to make this happen. But because this is Amherst, one of the ways that we think students can most easily and naturally learn how to interact across their differences is to do it in the context of work. Most people learn how to get to know and like each other when they have a shared purpose and a project, not just because people want us to, or not just because in the abstract it's a good thing. So one of the ways in which we think it would be specifically an Amherst way to proceed in trying to bring students together in ways that are meaningful and substantive, not just put them in the same dorm or the same dining hall, would be to provide more and more opportunities for them to work together. Catherine, I don't know if you'd like to talk about some of the projects that you're providing incentives for. Would you like to hear more about those? Yeah. Of course you would. Come on up.
So the kinds of opportunities that we're talking about is faculty-led travel. Ironically, this year we're having courses that are still planning on going to Puerto Rico and Turkey. So we'll see how that works out. But basically the idea is to create opportunities where students are working together, ideally with faculty, and spending 24/7 often together. And that seems to me to be a really excellent way for students to get to know each other in really deep ways. Beyond the travel opportunities, we're interested in students doing research in teams. Many students in the sciences have been doing this for quite a while. So most of our scientists have, somewhere between 3 and even 10 or 12 students working in their labs over the summer or over the course of the year. That's building teams who are really getting to know each other and sharing an intellectual passion. We are also doing that in the humanities and the humanistic social sciences. Every spring we are running tutorials of 4 to 6 students led by faculty, and the students in those tutorials are then given stipends to stay at Amherst over the summer to continue the work with their peers and the faculty member on faculty-student research collaborations. Those collaborations have ended up in the publication of books and in many presentations at national conferences and also published articles. So we're trying to build out more and more of these kinds of opportunities. They are expensive, but intensive education is expensive, and they seem to really be paying off. When you talk to the students and hear the kinds of experiences they are having, it's really pretty amazing.
Thank you, Catherine. Also, thank you. We've also started, and again, this is the brainchild of Professor Serrett, who's also the Associate Dean of the faculty, teams for students who come in as first years. And that has great promise, in my view. Austin, do you have a second to talk about those teams?
This is a dream come true for a faculty member to have 2 microphones. Pretty fabulous.
Don't get carried away.
So every first year seminar student at Amherst, every entrance student.
Austin, can you move forward so that the people in the balcony can see and hear, and use one mic? Some of us can't hear that well.
So this year, for the first time, every entering student at Amherst is associated with a team in their first year seminar. And what that means is, in addition to the intellectual work that is done in the first year seminar, the work of focusing on close reading, on writing carefully, 6 times during the semester they're meeting with these teams, and that's usually 2 members of the staff and a faculty member. And those teams are focusing with the students on issues of adjustment to college. How are they balancing their intellectual, their social, their extracurricular work? How are they dealing with stress? How are they learning to work together? What challenges are they encountering in their social life? So every college and university in the United States has a first-year orientation that usually goes for a week. And then the first-year students are kind of abandoned to the rest of the campus. We are not abandoning our first-year students. We're accompanying them on the journey, making a transition over the course of their first semester here. And just a couple of other things to say. The people who are doing, one of the remarkable things about Amherst is the investment of faculty and staff in the well-being of students. So staff members and faculty are doing this really without compensation in order to accompany the students on this journey. And that says something quite remarkable about the commitment of people in this community to the well-being of the students who are here. And then the last thing is, those groups are called teams for a reason. So when President Martin talks about private friendship and public friendship, every first-year seminar here is composed in a way that is as representative as possible of the entire class. That means those teams are students that bring great diversity together. And our hope is that by working together on these issues of adjustment, by listening to each other about their own struggles, that those teams will also forge what President Martin has called private friendship and public ones as well.
Thank you, Austin.
Maybe I can get one of those microphones.
Yes, you can. It's coming. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you. My name is David Beebe. I'm in the class of 1956, and I was present at that lecture that Jack Kennedy
You
gave.
were?
I was.
Wow. Fantastic.
That must speak to my longevity that you were giving the... Anyway, it was an amazing occasion. He was late for some reason, and everybody was assembled in the cage. And then you heard the helicopter land down in Memorial Field, and then pretty soon the ruffles and flourishes, and then hail to the chief. And of course, it was a full academic procession. And he came down with robes, but no hat. He never wore a hat. And that experience and that speech has been something that has stuck with me all these years. It was a great experience.
I can imagine. Well,
And
thank you for sharing
you
that.
for commemorating that recently. That's terrific.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. Yeah. Actually, someone said to me, oh, not just someone, but we have this semester at Amherst as a visiting faculty member, Ray Suarez. Some of you will know who that is. And Ray came up to me the other night and said, at yet another lecture, which was fabulous, by Kwame Anthony Appiah, Ray came up to me and he goes, Biddy, I looked at your program and I saw 5 hours devoted to a 25-minute speech, and I thought, but I came and it was riveting the entire time. And that is something I didn't mention that's characteristic of Amherst, but Austin, Sarah did mention it, and that is close reading. And I am 100% persuaded that in addition to the abilities of quantitative reasoning, and probably coding too, which are not, in the first instance, what liberal arts has to do or aims to do, close reading and writing, which are so associated with Amherst College, are the things that need to be preserved forever. Those skills cannot be beat when it comes either to success in careers or success at friendship. Close reading, close listening, close hearing, and developing the analytical abilities to bring one's own independent thoughts to bear on a very or relatively short text, a 25-minute speech. There was nothing in any of the contributions that was repetitive or unnecessary. It's amazing. I love close reading. Okay, well, I would like to be back in the classroom. Okay, sorry. Yes.
Thank you so much for all these remarks. As an alum, it's exciting to see the big transformations and also the subtle transformations. I was wondering if you could talk just a tiny bit about the paintings that we're seeing up behind you. I don't know if this happened on your tenure, but there's some new faces for this space up there.
Oh, that's a wonderful observation. Yes, the rearranging did occur on my watch. I won't talk about each one, but I felt that the front of the chapel needed to be more representative of the history and the community, and also representative of the contribution over time of faculty. So the one woman, I guess, in the chapel, yes, is Rose Alver, who was a professor of psychology here, who also, I think, was one of the founders of women's studies when it was founded. And her contributions over many decades to this college, both in the classroom, in her research, and in her help in governing the college through many years, I think make her more than worthy of being a representative of the faculty in the chapel. There was no faculty representative portrait before. This is Richard Wilbur, up at the top right, one of America's greatest poets. And this person, who knows who this is? Charles Hamilton Houston. Oh my gosh. We had a speaker for orientation for our students, given by one of our alums, who's the vicar of Trinity Church, Wall Street. And he gave a gorgeous speech about Charles Hamilton Houston, at the end of which he looked out at the new students and he said, "This is the best of Amherst. Charles Hamilton Houston is the best of Amherst." Charles Hamilton Houston was a student at Amherst when he was the only African American student here. He managed, because he wasn't allowed to join a fraternity, he managed to figure out a way to have 2 rooms in his dorm, one his bedroom, the other a study. He was, I believe, the commencement speaker. He was a superb student. And many people know of the importance of his work because we know what Thurgood Marshall did to get Brown v. Board of Education through, desegregation. But the groundwork for Brown v. Board and for the desegregation of schools in the country was the work of Charles Hamilton Houston. And too few people know that. Not just too few people in the Amherst community, too few people in the world. What he did is remarkable. He had a brilliant strategy that he developed for getting to as far as the Supreme Court with the fight for desegregation. He started with graduate schools and public universities and made a case about segregation that it was the duty of the states, if they were going to support graduate education, say law education for white students, they must do dealing with the separate but equal. They must invest equal resources in the education of black students, which of course helped him then build the case for desegregation over time, because the country was not making good even on separate but equal, which is the case he was able to make through. Anyway, you should read about him. What he did in a less visible way, I'm sure Thurgood Marshall would have said, was the work that had to be done in order to make Thurgood Marshall possible. Well, okay, that was a lot about Charles Hamilton Houston, but I based a commencement speech recently on him, and so I know a lot. Okay, I won't go through all of them, but yes, that's the answer to your question. And my favorite president of Amherst is in the back of the room, Alexander Meiklejohn, who was president of Amherst College some 100 years ago, a little more. And he's my favorite because he's the most intellectually interesting to me. And because he was fanatically passionate about quality of education. He left Amherst. He was actually asked to leave Amherst or fired for something that had nothing to do with his ideas, but something to do with finances. And he then went to the University of Wisconsin, where he established integrated liberal studies, which has its, it still exists, not in the form in which he created it. But he was a curricular strategist and a passionate believer in the liberal arts. Okay, that's enough about the portraits.
Hi, Hi, and thanks for arranging this. This is wonderful. Coming from the financial industry, and as we know, it's experiencing a lot of technological disruption, as much as every other industry is, and the economy is being impacted by it. We know close reading, writing, and all the other skills that are being imparted to the kids are vital. But do you think that the children that are getting out in 2021 will need additional skill sets? And if so, what is the university doing about it?
I hope I understood everything you said, but so correct me if I'm not answering the question. Yes, close reading and writing are crucial. I emphasize those because I feel in general they have over the past 20, 30 years been de-emphasized in favor of the notion that students should be trained for particular kinds of jobs, and that what they really need are skills in economics and the mathematics that drives a lot of finance. They need all of it. So my emphasis is placed on the humanities and humanistic inquiry only because when I think about the difficulty this country and humans generally are having understanding one another, appreciating one another, making connections with one another, I think that all of our technological advances and our mathematical skills are not the ones that will help us restore human relationships. But I think learning how to listen, how to be open to a text, to another person's take on a text, how to respect the importance of evidence and argumentation, how to be open to other people's perspectives and argumentation, those are skills and values that I think it feels urgent to transmit, along with mathematical skills and economic foundations. Economics is one of the largest majors here, and I don't worry about students pursuing an education in economics or math and statistics. Math and statistics are the fastest growing majors across all demographics at the college, and I see that as a good thing. But where, even at the Harvards and the Williams and the Swarthmores and maybe not the Yales, the enrollments in humanities have really decreased sharply and everyone's worrying about it. I'm just remarkably grateful that those enrollments have not decreased sharply at Amherst, and I'm dead set on keeping it that way. That's all. Dead set seems a little strong. Determined. Yeah. Other questions or comments or concerns? Anything you're worried about you'd like us to know about? Yes.
Thank you again for your remarks. In relation to the first question, you sort of alluded to the cohesion question being a little bit more complicated.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Yes, sorry, I didn't come back to that. I don't know whether I would say the student body feels cohesive all the time, certainly not, or whether cohesiveness is what most characterizes the student body at this point, or, to be completely frank with you, whether it ever has. I think when we look back on experiences, they tend to feel more cohesive and harmonious than they are in the moment. But having said that, there are divisions among students at Amherst, as there are on other campuses. They take a range of different forms. I think students experience a great deal of cohesion at certain moments, just as we all do, and a lot of fragmentation and tension at others. This is the state of the country, and as I frequently say to audiences, each one of us, I was going to say adults, I know that our students are also adults, sort of, in the making, but each one of us has to ask ourselves, if we think about our situation in the world, where we live, how we live, who our friends are, what communities we interact with, I think we have to ask ourselves, how well are we doing in building community with people who are unlike us, who have different backgrounds? How easy do we find it to do that? And then we have to admit, I think, that most people aren't really engaged as much as we'd like to be, or probably need to be, in that kind of activity and interaction. And so then we have to ask ourselves, can 17 to 22-year-olds, which is what most of our students are, can they be expected to be really great at that right away and to constitute themselves as a student body that is completely cohesive? I think the answer is no, but I think that what we're doing is giving them opportunities to learn how to do it better. And also trying to intervene when it makes sense for us to intervene in some of the ways that any community can start creating divisions that are self-fulfilling prophecies, whether it's the athlete-non-athlete divide that seems sort of less frequently invoked as a division this year than it did last year, in my experience, which is obviously limited, but still matters to people, or whether it's any other sort of difference that creates tensions among students. I think that the tensions are there, the fragmentation is there, and there is cohesion at the moments where you would expect and want a sense of the whole to be part of students' experience. That it's a work in progress. It's definitely not perfect. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to add an observation because I have a daughter who graduated 16, and we speak with her often. She lives in New York City now, in Brooklyn. And as to the cohesion point, to the extent that there isn't sometimes a great deal of cohesion at Amherst, we find that Amherst students outside of Amherst, when they're out in the world, are very cohesive.
Yes.
And she has noted to me how many people from her class, including many people she wasn't particularly friendly with when she was here, are in her neighborhood now, and they see each other on the street, and then they get together. Yeah. And she said there's nothing like getting together with a bunch of Amherst people.
Yes. Well, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I was in D.C. a few weeks ago, and I met with three graduates, 2017 graduates. And two of them had been part of the Amherst Uprising and had expressed their own dissatisfaction with some of the ways the college is failing to meet needs of students. And, both of them separately said to me several things that I found interesting. Now that they're out, they feel fortunate to have had the Amherst education they got, partly because they see the advantages they're having in the workplace, the advantage of their analytical abilities, their confidence, and their writing were the three things that each of them mentioned. They also said that it's hard when one is here in the midst of things and experiencing the frustrations that are felt, understandably, by our students. Because let's face it, there is no institution that reaches its own ideals, and we're far from some of ours. But what each of them said is, looking back, they realized it was hard to appreciate in the moment what they now appreciate about the education they got, which is not to say they disagree with their former selves about how far short some aspects of their experience fell from what they thought it should be. But I agree. So all of that is to say I agree that in hindsight, things take on a different feel. But more importantly, Amherst alumni realize pretty quickly that they have something in common with other Amherst alumni, which is sometimes hard to define. But what these students said, those in DC, is similar to what your daughter seems to have experienced, and that is they called it the quality of conversation. What they missed most about being here is the quality of conversation that you can have here. And so they seek out Amherst grads in DC because they know that they'll have conversations that are substantive, that include plenty of critical disagreement and stimulation. And I do think that there's some Amherst alums who have said to me over the past few years, this is not the Amherst I knew. Amherst has changed so much. But in fact, when alumni and students get together, it's clear not only to those of us who are watching them, but also to them pretty quickly that there are really critical similarities between those who graduated decades ago, those who graduated 3 years ago, and those who are first, second, third, and fourth year students now. And that becomes obvious, maybe more in the absence of it in daily life than it is when one is in place. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Biddy. Sorry. You've had quite a tenure from the first day, one sort of challenge after another, and sort of commend you for your forbearance and clear dedication to finding solutions from one challenge after another. And I'm curious, when you look back, you know, starting with the sort of crisis of sexual assault and the divestment conversation about fossil fuel companies and the endowment, the uprising, the mascot, you know, on and on. God bless you. I think you've probably learned a lot. I'm curious if you look back on some of those sort of pinnacle challenges, where do you think that college has made both the most and the least progress? And also as a president, I think, what have you learned from that about leading this community?
About, what was your last?
As president, what have you learned about leading the community through that, you know, series of challenges?
Well, what I've learned, let me start with that. What I've learned is that there was a prospectus when I was getting interested in this job. That I read the prospectus that Amherst had prepared in their search for a president, and I was drawn to this one word in the prospectus, which said Amherst is a yeasty community, and I thought, what does that mean? But now I know. So that's what I've learned. You know, things rise up and bubble up and become contentious in ways that I would say are healthy and improve the quality of the place. I just talked to someone who's doing work on the history of Amherst, and as a number of us are, because we're going to celebrate the bicentennial of the college in 2021. And by the way, those of you who are parents of first-year students know that your children are the class of 2021 and will be here for a lot of celebration. They'll probably also learn more about the history of the college than most classes because we'll be emphasizing it so much. Okay. The history of Amherst is dotted through and through with protest and speaking out and efforts to disclose and reveal the ways in which we fall short of our ideals. I think ideals are important. Having a sense of values is crucial. Knowing that no institution ever reaches perfection is also crucial, and having a student body and a faculty that loves the place enough to take the time, the effort, and the thought that's required to point out its deficiencies and to work with administrations to change things, which students here have been willing to do in each of these cases, I think is a remarkable thing. Yes, there have been moments when it's been exhausting. And the ferment, speaking of yeastiness, it's a place full of ferment. It's a very intense place, which is why I say low stakes fun, where people feel the cohesion and the similarities among them, is really also crucial at a place like Amherst. But the intellectual ferment and the aspiration to be as good a place as people would like their college to be, that is all to the benefit of the college. Not every single thing that's said, not every single act that's committed is good for the college, but on the whole, I'd say I've learned to trust, but I had learned this to some degree before. I think I've learned even to a greater degree to trust that when people begin to protest or to point out, however critically and however problematic seeming a form, when they begin to point out problems, listen to them. Listen and assess what the problem is. It's an inquiry-based place, and it's a great place in that way to be a president, because one can always inquire, and inquiry and interest in what people are saying is highly valued. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not a place where you just loll about. You know, somebody said to me the other day, someone came from Boston for the JFK event, and at the end of the day she said to me, these 6 hours felt like a spa for the mind. And I thought, a spa is not the word I would ever have used for Amherst. But sometimes one needs a spa at the end of the day. So, no, I don't know if I've answered your question. The crises at Amherst, you know, it wouldn't have mattered whether, in a way, whether I was here or at some other college, because the issue of sexual misconduct and sexual assault occurred nationwide and is occurring in yet another wave now across all institutions, it seems. Issues of race and racism are crucial for all of us to try and address and eventually make progress, much greater progress than the country's made. Those issues are important everywhere. So none of the things that, the mascot, well, we were out in front, I guess. Now the question of monuments and remembrance and how to honor the past without seeming to celebrate aspects of the society or culture that are extraordinarily painful and traumatic to large portions of the population. That is an issue across the entire country and indeed the world. As a scholar of German culture, the whole question of how one remembers the past, how one honors the victims of genocide, how one continues. These are fascinating questions and really important ones. And when people try to trivialize it on one side or the other, I'm always amazed, because these are such interesting and important questions and really difficult ones. So when on one side or the other people bash anyone who has a view that's more complicated than for or against, I'm always sort of surprised. But in any case, all of these issues are issues for the entire society and beyond. And sometimes people will talk about them and their occurrence at Amherst as if they're Amherst specific. None of the things that we've dealt with over my 6 and almost a half years here have been isolated to Amherst. Amherst is something of a bubble in a way that's good, but it's in the world. And the fact that it's in the world is a good thing, because, to go back to my earlier emphasis, that's how we're going to help prepare this generation to be in a world that they can make better, if you don't mind that kind of aspirational language. That's my hope anyway. So I should let you all go, because we have to beat Trinity, by the way.